Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. And with me in the studio today, I've got Mike Robinson. Hello, Mike.
Afternoon.
Well, afternoon even. Yeah. Well, what an incredible weekend it's been. Of course, the BBC is the main subject. We're going to cover some other issues, but it's quite clear to us that what we're watching unfold is a massive establishment cover-up in order to keep people's eye off the real subject, which is, of course, the paedophile rings, which are stretching to the top of the establishment and into Westminster. But before we start with our news items today, we'll just give you an update on the weather. Unfortunately, it is pouring with rain here in Plymouth and is very cold, and it looks set to be that way for the next few days. So raincoats and brollies. Okay, what are we beginning with, Mike? It's something you've spotted.
Right, so Sir David Richards has come out and said that really it looks like Britain is going to get directly involved in Syria. So we're going to be sending troops over. And of course, what he's saying is that contingency plans are in place for a very limited military response. And I guess we have no alternative but a limited military response, since we don't have much of a military left, or it's shrinking daily.
Well, of course, whilst David Cameron is touring the world, saying what he is going to do to remove legitimate governments in foreign countries, of course, what he's doing at home is cutting the armed forces to the bone. So this is rhetoric. If any troops are going to be used, I suspect that there's going to be a heavy reliance on American troops as usual.
Right, so in the meantime, Russia Today had this guy on, and he is the leader of the Free Syrian Army, and he's basically threatening Assad. He's saying Assad will not get out of Syria alive. He would be lucky if he meets the same fate as Gaddafi. That's what he's saying, and this is the man that we're supporting.
And we're talking about providing arms to.
Exactly. So I just wanted to point out what exactly is going on here. I mean, we've got. The situation is quite simple. You know, Britain decides that a foreign head of nation, the head of a foreign nation state is not playing ball, and so they whip up an opposition. That opposition includes Al Qaeda terrorists. They finance them. They send them non-lethal military aid, such as satellite phones, body armor, medical supplies, and so on. Yeah. They provide them with intelligence information from our Cyprus bases, and there are many people been reporting that we've been supplying them with training. We've sent special forces in there to train them. So we have effectively created the civil war. And if you just look back at that Mail article, apparently we're going in to solve the humanitarian crisis, but of course we created that humanitarian crisis because there was no humanitarian crisis there until we started messing about. So this is absolutely clear problem, reaction, solution right in front of our eyes. Yeah. And what more can we say about it?
Well, I think probably what we should say is, we should remind people that it was General Sir David Richards who was actually visiting Israel some months ago, and the topic of conversation was to do with military matters and, of course, the build-up towards some sort of military action against Iran. But the details of those meetings were never released to the public. But it was very interesting that there was such a high priority on presumably military cooperation between Britain and Israel. So we wonder at the moment how neutral Britain's overseas, I hesitate to use the word defence because we seem to be going on the offence, but Britain's overseas defence policy, is it simply coming out of Westminster, or are we seeing foreign countries in the Middle East dictating what Britain's policy should be? More transparency required around General Sir David Richards, I think.
I think so. Which brings us on to Portugal. So a little bit of economic news, because the marches still continue in Europe over austerity plans. And in Portugal, we've had, just at the end of last week, thousands of soldiers who marched alongside unions against austerity. They're mostly marching in civilian dress, although I have, in some of the photographs, I've seen some military caps.
Right.
An estimated 10,000 active and retired military personnel. They're calling the cutbacks unjustified. They're calling for the President Silva, to veto the government's plans for the austerity budget, which has been adopted. And they're basically suffering the same kind of problems that our military is, massive cutbacks, and they're objecting to it. But it's interesting to see them walking side by side with the general public. So it would be nice to see the same thing happening in this country, perhaps.
Well, maybe we're headed towards that, but I think the thing which fascinates me about this is that over the weekend, of course, we've got our media dominated by what's been happening with the BBC. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't really seen any reporting by the BBC on these serious issues in Europe. We've certainly had reports of the violence, but here we've got a very interesting tale where we're seeing armed forces and other members of the public sector coming out in support of people in Portugal. And it appears to me this is not being reported by British mainstream media. So are the two going hand in hand? We've got these very, very serious events in Europe at the moment, and it seems to me that what has been deliberately created, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, what's been deliberately created in Britain at the moment is the most enormous media and press smokescreen.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm just being cynical here. I think there's more to it.
No, I think that's absolutely right.
And we've got more sad news here with...
Right, so this is quite sad because, this is Spain, actually.
Spain.
And this lady is Amaya Aganya. I hope I've pronounced her name correctly, but sadly she found herself in the situation where her door was being kicked in by bailiffs as a result of an eviction. The bailiffs opened the door to find her standing on a chair on the balcony, and she decided that she would, as an act of protest, jump off.
Yeah.
She was found alive, but unfortunately they were not able to save her life. So she has died. As a result, at least one Spanish bank, although not her bank, I believe, has decided to suspend all evictions because this is the second suicide to take place in Spain in the last 3 weeks. And Prime Minister Rajoy is saying that he will bring in legislation to stop these evictions taking place. Now, this lady was a politician. I believe she was not a politician when this event happened, but she has been a politician in the past, so she's been involved in politics and clearly decided that enough was enough. This caused a large protest. According to Russia Today, many of the slogans that were being presented at the protests were saying things like no eviction unanswered and things like banker, remember we have rope. And I think everybody in authority should remember that the populations have rope, and perhaps when they're brought to account at some point, they may not be too happy with the outcome. But
yeah.
That's not a threat. It's a reality, particularly in Southern Europe, where they're experiencing real hardship.
But we're also seeing this dictatorial regime in UK, where we're now passing over what was originally council housing, but public sector housing is being passed over to totally unaccountable housing associations, and then we're seeing these housing associations introducing their own rules as to what people can and can't do. And last week we had one lady who contacted us, very surprised that after a problem with just one payment on her rent, which was not her fault, she was then starting to receive eviction orders or letters moving towards eviction from a local housing authority in the southwest of England. So we've got exactly the same pattern building here in UK. that not even your home is secure. I think this is part of the state generating a fear factor.
That fear factor, of course, is being enhanced by the fact that there's no attempt to in any friendly manner approach the person who is apparently in arrears. It's an immediate threat of direct action, which has life-changing consequences. So you can understand people's frustration.
And of course, if you want to really see what the state is capable of, and indeed local authorities, have a look at the UK column Insight documentary, which specifically features on this topic of a resident being thrown out of his home in Kensington and Chelsea. And to date, of course, UK column has not received any correspondence from Kensington Chelsea to explain their actions, but a very, very disturbing video. If you'd like to know what to do to stop what's happening, people have got to team up. So one eviction, preferably 500 people there to support the family being evicted. Yeah. Well, we come on to the main part of the news. It's quite incredible at the moment that the BBC, which is normally so good at peddling international propaganda, is now peddling a different sort of propaganda. But of course, what it's achieved over the last 3 or 4 days in particular is the fact that all sight of and talk of paedophilia has disappeared. Jimmy Savile has now disappeared from the screens, and something rather different is taking place, and that is the collapse of really the reputation and the control structure of the BBC. So the first slide that we've got here, taken from the BBC, of course, is talking about the resignation of their boss, George Entwistle, which has happened over the last few hours. And of course, this is an extraordinary story in that this man supposedly was totally unaware not only of the programs that were being pushed out, but he didn't know what was going on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. So we've been exposed to him resigning, but of course it's now emerged that he's getting a massive payoff, which I think is somewhere over £400,000. So is this a payoff for resigning, or is this basically something to do with the whole creation of this media frenzy? Not over the paedophiles and who the paedophiles are, but over how the matter has been reported itself. Now, the Mail has been quite useful on this subject because in the Mail on Sunday, on page 4, if anybody's still got a copy of that paper, I'll just hold it up because we'll show you how the scale works. Here's page 4. The bit we're interested in is down here. So one small box containing some very important information. But what the Mail was starting to point out was that the Newsnight story had been created by an organisation called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and the Mail article was highlighting the fact that one of the trustees of the Bureau was Sir David Bell. We're going to come on to him with a lot more detail. But starting to point out the connections through to the Bureau via Sir David Bell and the Leveson inquiry. And of course, this starts to make the whole media frenzy at the moment very, very interesting because, of course, mainstream papers have been attacked over the phone hacking, but here we have something which seems to have been created in order to cause problems with the BBC, and we're already now seeing Tory MPs calling for statute, so the law to be changed so that the press and media can be controlled. It seems
I understand Leveson is due to report within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. So the thing is building very quickly, and what appears to be happening in UK now is that the state is moving in to take control of the mainstream press and media. And I think that the Mail, in publishing some of these links, which the other papers do not seem to be doing at the moment, is an indication that at least some of the journalists are beginning to wake up. So if we have a look at this in a bit more detail, of course this is where the story starts with the abuse victim Stephen Mesham. Now we've seen an extraordinary turnaround that this man was supposedly named and accused Lord McAlpine. He's since apologised and withdrawn that statement. Many people wonder whether this man has actually been badly undermined. We're talking about Stephen here. Many of the papers have published accusations against him, saying that basically he was not only a bad witness at the original inquiry into child abuse at the children's home, but he'd later been accused of fraud connected to one of the charities that was supposedly helping victims. Now, several of the newspapers have been disingenuous at the least, because they've published the headline about this initial court case to do with fraud in the charity, but what they haven't actually done is said that this man was ultimately found not guilty. So we have a person who clearly has suffered very, very serious abuse as a child over a number of years, and all of a sudden the mainstream media and papers are not interested in who abused him. What they're interested in is starting to put a smokescreen over the whole of the Savile affair. So did this man simply change his mind, or was he encouraged to change his mind? Or indeed, some people have suggested over the web that maybe pressure was put on, whether or not he had further information on the abuser. So if we take a little bit of a look at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, this is the Guardian report here, and in the picture you can see Angus Stickler, the chief reporter, and this was in the Newsnight film that sparked the resignation of the BBC Director General George Entwistle.
So it was the Bureau of Investigative Journalism that actually created that report on Newsnight, which is the one that's the centre of all these resignations in the BBC.
Absolutely, but it gets more interesting than that, because this man was the man who actually created the tweet which caused the problem. So we've got a little bit of background on him. He's an interesting man anyway, because I've moved on here to the boss of the Bureau, Ian Overton, the boss of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, was the man who produced the tweet. And basically his track record is as a commissioning executive at ITN, senior producer at the BBC, and also a foreign correspondent. And this is what he sent out. If all goes well, we've got a Newsnight out tonight about a very senior political figure who is a paedophile. So if we really get into the detail about what's been happening, it is not the simple case that a victim made a false accusation against Lord McAlpine. What we've actually got in the background is an organisation which sends out a deliberately provocative tweet that something was going to be released, but in fact the statement wasn't made publicly by the victim themselves. So there is something clearly operating behind the scenes, and what is actually taking place at the moment. So this is another part of the jigsaw here. We're sticking with the Mail because there's been some particularly good information in the Mail itself, and what the Mail is pointing out is that the Newsnight report that led to Lord McAlpine being falsely named as a child abuser was effectively controlled by the BBC's director of Northern Ireland, a gentleman called Peter Johnston. And the article goes on to point out that really this man, with a background in marketing for Shell and also as a management consultant with Coopers and Lybrand, did not have an in-depth journalistic background. So the question has to be asked as to why the BBC was allowing somebody in Northern Ireland to actually control what was obviously an extremely controversial programme. So the answers to why this man was involved haven't yet fully come out, and I think there's going to be a lot more digging into this man and his position and background. But if we come in now at a slightly different angle, we're going to just review the information that UK Column Live produced on the Media Standards Trust. And we pointed out that there was a little circle of interest between the Media Standards Trust, the Hacked Off campaign, which came into being with the support of the Media Standards Trust. And of course, it was the Hacked Off campaign that really started to shout and scream for an investigation into the press. Now, they've also been connected with an organisation called Full Fact, which calls itself an independent fact-checking organisation, but we have found them to be wanting on many occasions. But the key thing is that here is this group of organisations, call themselves independent, call themselves charities, but what they're actually doing is lobbying very strongly for major change with the British press and media. Now, I'm recapping here because basically it was very important to see who the funders were of these organisations. And of course, the moment we produce a list, we're looking at very powerful people in British society and politics. Lord Sainsbury, the Rothschilds there, Nuffield is there. Also the Pearson Group, Pearson Foundation, and that is of particular interest because this is the company with which Sir David Bell is connected. But here are these organisations, and we simply ask the first question, and that is, what business is it of these organisations to be starting to fund organisations which are lobbying for very draconian controls over the British press? We also need to point out here that in this little web of intrigue, we've also got the Scott Trust, and of course the Scott Trust is intimately the Guardian newspaper, and the Guardian newspaper itself is involved with the Media Standards Trust. So we have vested interest, we have a tangled web. What are these people up to? We can also see that Full Fact itself is funded by Joseph Rowntree, Nuffield and the Esme Fairbairn organisation. So we're seeing the same people that are funding Media Standards Trust also funding this other supposedly independent organisation. We can pull this together because, of course, David Bell is intimately connected with the Media Standards Trust. He's intimately connected with Common Purposes and some other organisations, which we'll see in a minute. And at the moment, David Bell, or until recently, obviously, Lord Leveson is compiling his report at the moment, but the head of the Leveson inquiry into the media and the press has a panel which is headed by Sir David Bell. Now, what the Mail's, so here's the web of vested interest. What the Mail's story is now pointing out, that Sir David Bell, in addition to being involved with Common Purpose, heading the Leveson panel, and acting as chair for the Media Standards Trust, is also now shown to be involved with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. So our web of intrigue now starts to expand. So here's Lord Leveson, of course, is the man who fairly shortly is expected to be recommending that there are legal powers put in place to enforce control of the press, and some of the mainstream papers themselves are now talking about newspapers being state-controlled. So a chum of David Cameron, appointed by David Cameron, but what's going on in the background? Links between the two men is obvious, of course, in the role of the Leveson inquiry. We bring in again the links by Sir David Bell to the Media Standards Trust. If you don't know much about that organisation, please get on the internet and look at their website, where you will find the list of trustees supporting organisations and funders. We've got the Hacked Off campaign, which of course not only pushed for the Lord Leveson investigation, but is actually setting itself up as a full-time body now to monitor standards of the British press and media, and they are supported by Full Fact, which we've just identified. So if we carry on around the web, here we've got Ian Overton, who's the editor of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and we can now show very clearly that David Bell is a trustee. So he is involved with one of the organisations that has helped start the media feeding frenzy over supposedly the false reporting of Lord McAlpine as a child abuser. We can link him with the journalist Angus Stickler, who is the man that did the bulk of the work. And of course, we can also now link this back into Peter Johnson, who is the mysterious BBC Northern Ireland controller that's actually got involved with this. So I think the summary from UK Column Live is that actually what we are starting to see is an absolute web of vested interest, which has helped create a story which has now completely destabilised the mainstream media reporting of the paedophile rings. And also now we've got the stage that the BBC itself is being undermined. We've got a number of people who've resigned, and the government is already calling for a slimmed down and more efficient management structure. What do you think's happening here, Mike? What's your opinion on this?
It's another example of the government creating a problem which didn't. I mean, the BBC has many problems, but not on this scale. This problem has been created. They're going to provide a solution through Leveson. People are obviously clamouring for changes at the BBC, but as you rightly say, this is an absolute smokescreen. Let's get away from the notion of paedophiles at the top levels of society. Yeah. And let's focus on breaking up the media, because the media is there to report on paedophiles at the top levels of society. So
the other thing we can highlight, of course, is Sir David Bell, chairman of the trustees at Common Purpose. This is the political charity which at the moment has contracts for training the top civil servants. We have the Cabinet Office and Francis Maude MP refusing to release details of those contracts and how the contracts were set up with Common Purpose. So we've got the transparency in the Conservative government completely shot. They won't release this information. We've got Chris Patten standing alongside George Entwistle during his resignation, and of course Chris Patten is also a senior member of Common Purpose. And we have the BBC itself, which has spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on Common Purpose training, also refusing to give the general public details of what those Common Purpose graduates are doing. We can follow this up by the fact that if we follow the Common Purpose networks through the system, we are now seeing paedophiles embedded in those networks. There's an incestuous, nasty relationship forming here, I think, Mike.
This Common Purpose being a secret organisation, everything's done under Chatham House rules. They don't discuss what goes on within the networks. It is a networking organisation as well as a training organisation, so the networks stay connected after you've done the training. It seems to be a paedophile's paradise. If paedophiles get in among that organisation, that's a perfect way to... Absolutely. This kind of thing should not be tolerated in society, in my opinion, this kind of organisation. Well,
of course, the other thing that we need to refocus on is in fact what the BBC is prepared to do to help expose child abuse. And we flagged up last week that BBC Scotland had absolutely pulled out of an investigation into the Holly Gregg abuse. So we had this gentleman, Mark Daly, who said to Anne Gregg and Robert Green in relation to that terrible abuse case that they believed Holly, the victim, they believed what she said, they believed the evidence, and then all of a sudden there's a sudden change and they pull out of the reporting. And I've got to say to our audience today, we believe there's going to be a further scandal to do with the BBC pulling out of reports which would reveal serious child abuse, sexual and physical abuse of young people in the system. So we've got a secretive organisation, we've got a web of the BBC tied in with senior politicians, and we now have these mysterious organisations helping to create enormous media turbulence, which is now starting to hide the trail of where these paedophiles are.
Yeah.
It must be deliberate, I think. A couple of small bits to finish on. I know we're focusing a lot on the Mail today, but we will change our papers for the rest of the week. But this is a very interesting article saying that personal details of 8 million children have been stored on a secret database without their parents' knowledge. Information held included the child's age, sex and academic and behavioural records. And this is a Capita One system, so it can potentially share the information to external agencies such as social services and youth offending teams. We would encourage viewers to have a look at what's just happened in Ireland, where there has been a referendum which has resulted in a vote to give the state virtually total powers over children, over and above their parents. And certainly it's going to make it much easier for British social services to take children from Ireland. So at the moment, the UK Columns policy is that we need to stay focused on how these top-level paedophile rings are operating, how the police and public services are helping to promote and control paedophile rings, and how we are going to expose senior politicians who, from the intelligence coming into the column, are clearly involved in the abuse of children. Okay, we'll end on that note. If you want to stop what's going on, please research, please talk to your friends and families, and spread the truth wherever possible. Once exposed, these people simply can't survive. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.